Hello and welcome to this information video about developing an awareness of the specific conditions of dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia and dysgraphia. My name is Andrew Middleton and I'm the Inclusion Manager at ISS. So starting with dyslexia. Dyslexia affects between 10 and 15% of people, so it is one of the most common specific learning conditions in the world. And it will typically affect a person's reading, writing and spelling, but it has no bearing on their general intelligence. And on the positive side, research shows that up to 40% of top entrepreneurs are dyslexic, which is 3 times more than in the general population. And we'll talk a bit more about why that might be. So, some of the effects of dyslexia. Affects the way that the brain processes information, and it's often around language, but each individual that has dyslexia will be different. And a young person can have dyslexia alongside other learning conditions such as ADHD. And dyslexia is likely to be genetic, so it can run in families, but that's not a guarantee. And it can cause frustration because of those difficulties in processing information, which can then lead to disruptive or challenging behaviour. But that's not a direct symptom of dyslexia. So it's often picked up when a child starts school because they will start to find the following quite challenging. So learning to read, spelling, the order of sounds, their memory and their sequencing can all be affected by dyslexia. But as I said, it can also bring great strengths. So young people with dyslexia and adults as well can be innovative thinkers. They can have extra creativity. They can have good gist memory, which is about remembering the essence of information but not the minor details. They can be good verbal communicators because of their difficulties with written information, and they can excel in one particular area. So, to get a diagnosis of dyslexia, that must be done by an educational psychologist. And ISS now has access to a tool which can determine whether a young person is at risk of having dyslexia, but there's an additional cost for this and it's not an official diagnosis. So if you contact myself on that email, I can give you more information once we've got that up and running. And some further resources are there through some different websites. Some are specific to the UK, some are national charities and national organisations. So the next condition is dyslexia. This is also known as developmental coordination disorder, or DCD. It's a neurological disorder, which means that messages from the brain aren't interpreted properly by the body, and it can affect up to 10% of children, and boys are actually 4 times more likely to be diagnosed than girls. And again, it can run in families, but is not guaranteed. And it can present as problems with speech, movement, or coordination. The 3 main types. So motor is when we would see messy handwriting due to the fine motor coordination issues. Oral is the way they use their mouth due to problems coordinating the mouth, lips and tongue, so possibly eating and drinking. And verbal problems, specifically with being able to speak, which would then cross over into the speech and language and communication issues in one of the other videos that we've produced. So for diagnosis and intervention, there's no known cure, as there are for all of these different conditions, but the best results can come from early identification, which must be diagnosed by an educational psychologist or, in this case, a health professional. And in very young children, the developmental milestones such as crawling and walking may be delayed. And diagnosis does not usually happen until a child is 5. And following that diagnosis, the treatment which has the best impact is intensive and it's frequent. And if it's not picked up and it's not treated, then children could later have difficulties with their literacy. Again, some further websites there, some charities and some organisations specifically to dyspraxia, but then also more general ones about movement difficulties. The third one is Dyscalculia. This is specific and persistent difficulty in understanding numbers. So naturally it can lead to a range of difficulties in a young person's mathematics. About 6% of people have dyscalculia, and it occurs across all ages and all abilities. There's a big crossover with dyslexia, as 60% of individuals with dyslexia will also have difficulties with their maths. And some children will find maths difficult. It doesn't necessarily mean they have dyscalculia. So the signs. The difficulties will be persistent and will have been present since they were young. So it won't come and go. It will have always been there. And it will always apply to arithmetic, but not necessarily other areas of maths such as shape or space. They'll have difficulties in maths, but not necessarily in other subjects which don't involve numbers, which might be just writing based. And there's a lack of understanding of numbers and the simple number concepts and how numbers relate to each other. These young people will find some other signs of dyscalculia. They'll struggle to make sensible references to numbers. So when they're making a guess or when they're telling you something, their use of numbers won't be quite right. Young children, when learning number skills, will have difficulties knowing how many items are in a set. And they will rely on simple ways of working out answers like using their fingers or tapping. And extreme difficulties spotting patterns in numbers and making generalizations. And maths will bring on high levels of anxiety. They'll have difficulties with sequencing and following procedures in subjects other than maths, and they can forget previously mastered procedures very quickly. So diagnosis and intervention. Learners with dyscalculia can have some or all of the symptoms that I mentioned, but they'll also have difficulties with number sense, including comparing the values of different numbers. As with all of these conditions, early identification is vital and can only be done by an educational psychologist. And when intervention happens at a young age, it is to develop number awareness and flexibility. And that will then help build strong foundations for developing their understanding of the numbers. So some helpful strategies when working with young people with dyscalculia, and these will all take time to help them build their number sense skills. Things that work well include practicing counting and grouping objects, and then add to, subtract from, or divide the groups into smaller groups to practice the different mathematical operations. Combine the groups to show multiplication. You can work on estimating, build questions into your everyday conversations using phrases like about how many or about how much. Give them advice on how they do with that. Talk about the different relationships between quantities. So ask children to use words like more or less to compare things that they can know and that they see. Building opportunities to talk about time. So ask them to keep a track using a watch or a phone of how long it takes to drive or walk to the shop, and then compare that with another journey, maybe how long it takes to get to school, and ask them which is longer. All these helpful strategies are everyday practical things that they know, that they experience, because that's going to make more sense than doing equations on paper. Again, here's some websites that got some more information about Dyscalculia. And the final condition that we're going to look at is Dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is a condition that affects the ability to recognize and decipher written words and the relationship between letter forms and the sounds that they make. Because of this, writing, spelling, and forming words is challenging for anyone with dysgraphia. People with dysgraphia will likely struggle to write neatly, and their letters, numbers, words, and punctuation will often appear jumbled. And again, dysgraphia itself doesn't affect intelligence, but can often present in people with other learning abilities. Some of the signs of dysgraphia will generally emerge when the child is first introduced to writing, and they may experience difficulty with some other fine motor skills that they're learning. Another sign can be an unusual or a cramped grip or position of their pen or pencil when writing, which can in turn cause writing fatigue. Sometimes they will write the wrong word when they're trying to put their thoughts. To get a diagnosis is difficult, as many people have handwriting difficulties that isn't dysgraphia. Again, as with all of these, diagnosis will have to be by an educational psychologist, but it is a rare condition. It is sometimes hard to find a person who will feel confident in their skills to assess someone with this condition. It's important to note it's more than simply untidy writing. This will affect a young person's ability to write effortlessly. So writing will be an extra challenge, will be physically more difficult for these young people with the condition. So some strategies to help can be to wake your hands up before writing or typing. So moving your fingers around, rubbing your hands, clicking fingers. For young people with dysgraphia, because of the challenge of writing, it can be recommended that they use a computer in extreme circumstances. For young people that are able to write, cursive writing is much easier than printing because of the natural flow and the patterns that come with cursive. And you can try different papers, different pens, and see what works best. Papers of different colour can help, and pens and pencils of different sizes or using different grips can also help these young people. And again, you can consider some different ways that they and you can record information. So using audio recordings, pre-prepared handouts, or photographing rather than having to copy. And spelling should be tested by spelling out loud rather than writing, which, because of dysgraphia, as I've said, will. And to finish, there's some further resources there on the different websites, all around supporting young people and their parents with dysgraphia. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it useful. If your young person has, or you suspect they may have, any of the conditions that we spoke about. Thank you.